Welcome to Free to Pursue. My name is Hélène Massicotte, and I am presenting to you today part 2 of the How I Read a Book. If you are interested in part 1, I will have the link just above, and you can take a look at that video. In part 2, I'm going to cover the 7 steps I go through when I read a given book. And I will show you some examples. I'm looking over here because that's where they're stacked. Some examples of books that I have read or am currently reading and how I am applying what I'm talking about today. The 7 steps I go through in reading a book are: first, I need to select the book or books I'm going to read. Then I review the book's contents at a glance. Third, I start reading the book, and yes, there's more to it than just reading. Once I'm done reading the book, I will revisit the book I've just read. I'll then select quotes and make notes about the book. Once I've read the book completely and taken the notes down, I will count it as a book that I have officially read. And then I'll share my thoughts about a book, either in a book review or in an article or more articles on Free to Pursue. Not to mention, I'll also use my thoughts to make recommendations when people ask me in a given topic that I feel like I've had enough reading material to make a reasonable suggestion. I'll also use the information to make recommendations of books that others might appreciate. So let's take a look at all of those steps one by one. First, selecting a book to read. Now, the challenge that I have in selecting a book to read is that there is no shortage of books. And I have come to realize that there is no way that I will get to read all the books that I would like to read. And that reality that there is no way that I'm going to read every book that I would like to was made very clear to me in the book called How to Talk About Books You Haven't Read. A book that I reluctantly read because I had issues with the title. But anyway, I thought that that was a good realization to have, and to basically curate my list of what is interesting to me as books that I want to note that I would like to read in the future. I had a growing list of books that I wanted to read, and I quickly realized, especially after reading that book, that I could not keep that list. It was growing into the hundreds, and I mean, I read 50 to 70 books a year, and that was just, it was overwhelming. It felt like a to-do list that I would never get through. So instead, I don't keep a list like that anymore. I let books come to me, and then I am just picky on which one I actually choose to read. There are more books than I have time for, and so being selective in what I consume has been very helpful. I certainly use verbal recommendations by others. I use written recommendations by others. I also read comments on book reviews and on articles that I've written, some folks identifying books that they found particularly useful on a given topic. Sometimes that will feed my curiosity in taking a look at those books, at least considering them as next books to read. And I receive recommendations from a lot of different places, not only the articles I write, but also the speaking engagements, friends recommending books, and also from some blogs that I really enjoy. Farnham Street blog, Baka de Suyo is another one, and even Freakonomics as a podcast has some great book recommendations. Book recommendations in given books that I'm currently reading also tend to educate my short-term list of books that I would like to read, visits to bookstores and libraries, and also books I get in the mail. So now that I am a book reviewer, I do get quite a few requests from people to read their book. And my stance on that is anyone can send me their book as long as they know that I make absolutely no promise to even look at it. Now, of course, I look at the cover, there's no question there. But I don't want to make any guarantee to anyone that I will do more than peruse it, more than read a part of it, let alone finish it, let alone do a book review about it. The volume that I receive is just not conducive to making any sort of promises, and it's a lot of time to devote to a book that even partway through I say, it is not a book for me. One thing that you'll notice is that top 10 or top 100 book lists are not part of my book selection. I just don't think that a book's popularity is any indication of the value of its content. I think that because of increasing social media and news outlets touting specific books, I just don't find that it means that it's going to be all that good. I would rather take note of somebody who is a specialist in a given area who says that a given book is very good. So I don't usually let buzz feed my reading list. So once I've selected a book, how do I go about reading it? Well, the first thing I do is I look at the cover. I don't read the testimonials from other people who have read the book because I find that's going to influence what I think of the book. So I look at the book jacket, I look at what the author has written on the cover and the inside cover, and I go through the table of contents and the subheadings in the book just to get a feel for how the book is organized and essentially a bird's eye view of the contents without having to get right into the nitty-gritty of what the author is telling me. And then I start reading, and I read just about anywhere. I'll read in a comfy chair at home or in bed before going to sleep, on the plane, in a coffee shop, anywhere. I'm usually toting a book in my bag, no matter where I'm headed, if I'm going to have a few minutes here and there. Now, I do much prefer real physical books as opposed to the electronic type. Although if I'm traveling for extended periods of time, I do tend to use a tablet. Although when I went to Guatemala in March, April this year, I did lug 4 books in our very small suitcase. So obviously I make reading real physical books a priority. And when I read an actual physical book, I am armed with sticky notes, and I'm also armed with a pen and paper to make notes about the book as I come across insights or thoughts about it that I want to remember once I'm done. So here is a book I'm reading right now, Natural Causes by Barbara Enright. You'll see it here. Hopefully I'm not blinding you. And you'll see a nice number of sticky notes here. And also in the book, you will see the sticky notes I have at the ready to continue the process. Now, there are various ways that I use the sticky notes. So you'll see on the edge of the book here that I have sticky notes in a few different ways. When I want to take note of a given section or paragraph, I will put the sticky note lengthwise because I want to remind myself that I want to reread this whole section. And then when there is just a sentence that I'm interested in, I will angle, hopefully you can see here, I will angle the sticky note so that I pinpoint like an arrow to just that one sentence that caught my eye. Now you will notice that in here I also have a sticky note that sticks out. And that sticky note is, now I don't want to necessarily interrupt my reading when I am deep into reading. And so that outside sticky note is one of 3 things. It can be a note that I want to follow up on the contents of that given section. It could be that I want to tell someone about what I found in that specific passage on that specific page. And it also might be that, oh, this is a fantastic idea for an article and I either want to reference it back or possibly quote it. And that usually the sticky notes that really stick out like that are for short-term reminders that I probably want to act on within the next week or so. Finally, I don't have any in this book right now. And do I have any? Oh yeah, I do here. But I do have an example in this book, The Power of Story from Jim Lauer, that I'm currently reading. If a whole page is of interest, I will put the sticky note at the top of that page because it means the entire page is something that I want to utilize or review in the future. And so I put the sticky note on the top. Now, when I am reading an electronic version, I will highlight, as opposed to the corner sticky notes or the flat sticky notes on the side, I will highlight in yellow. And if it is a quote that I want to record, I will highlight that in blue. And if there is a follow-up action to the quote, I will highlight it in pink. Oh, and one other category. I will highlight in orange any typos or issues with the book if the book hasn't been released yet and I have a draft copy that the author gave me well in advance. I will send it back or offer in writing what I've found because sometimes just an extra set of eyes is helpful in the final editing process. I've also used the notes features in the applications that I use for reading books to remind myself of things that I want to remember, sometimes associated with a given quote that I've color categorized. Now, step 4 of 7 is that I revisit a book. So once I am done, I will go back to all those sticky notes that I put into the book and reread them. I love that part. It feels like it's almost like a movie trailer. I get all, to me, the best pieces of the book that resonated the most to me, and I get to consume it in just maybe an hour or so. And I look forward to that. It feels like reading dessert. And that dessert helps me internalize the material that I read the first time around. That condensed view reminds me of sometimes the additional context that I'd read around it, and just helps me synthesize the information that I got the first time around. Now, once I'm done with that, comes the 5th step, and that is selecting quotes and taking notes about the book. As I mentioned in part 1, I have about 1.5 pages of notes per book that I've read. And I have to say that the quality of the notes that I take on every given book has really improved over the years, because the more I've gone through the process and the more I've used past notes, I have a better appreciation for what my future self will need to hear from my current self in order to make heads or tails of why a part of a book was particularly interesting or important for either further reading or for application. Now, I try to select the best of the best quotes from any given book, but the quotes I select are affected by the way I'm thinking in the moment or at that particular time in my life. So the quotes are affected by what else I've read recently, what's going on in my life at the time, what my current interests are, and of course my own personal biases. And we all have them. Sometimes I can notice that that's happening, but unfortunately biases are often unconscious. So I just hope that I make a decent job of selecting reasonable quotes. And speaking of quotes, here is another one about reading from, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but W. Somerset Maugham, or Maugham, I'm not sure. Here's the quote. "The only important thing in a book is the meaning that it has for you." And that's true. I mean, I can't offer my thoughts on a given book, but that's from my context in my life at that point in time. And it may or may not resonate with you. We're all different, and that's okay. Anyone who consumes any given book will, by definition, have a different experience. We're just all not the same. And that's particularly true if you've ever had the experience of rereading a book. One that I can definitely remember is I read the first time around The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. I read that one first in 1999, and I thought, okay, it was a hard read, and I thought, yeah, okay, it's good, but whatever. And I was in my early 20s. And I read it again this past year. I'm going to say 2017, late 2017, but I'd have to look it up to be sure. And I loved it. It was so good, and I could not figure out why the first time I read it, it was such drudgery. And it is a very, very good book, and one that I recommend, highly recommend, still now that since I've read it, just about, I guess now, nearly a year ago. What a different experience. So sometimes the book also has to match where you are in life in a given time. So again, I'm the same person, but then again, no, I'm not. My experiences, my life experiences have influenced the way I think about things, and that's okay. And so for me, the book was, in essence, like two different books, two different experiences. Okay, so how do I count a book as read? I have got to have read it cover to cover. I have to have reviewed those sticky notes. I have to have gathered some quotes and taken some notes, written some notes based on the sticky notes that I've put in the book. And finally, this is going to be obvious, but it can't be a book I've already read. If I've already read it and noted it or counted it as read, I can't count it a second time. So as long as I haven't counted it before in my list, then yes, I'll include it. Now, the last step in my book reading process is to talk about the book. And usually I will talk about it in one or more ways. I will include quotes about the book in some articles that I'm writing. I will talk about it in a book review. I will reference it in some way in some articles that I write. And sometimes it can take months before I choose to include a book in something that I'm writing. And very often a book will fuel one or more articles. One great example of that is the book Scarcity has informed or influenced 14 or more articles on Free to Pursue. Now I'll give you a bonus number 8, and that is that one of the things I may very well do is a thorough book review. And you have seen the videos for these book reviews here on YouTube. You can find more book reviews in written format only for the time being on Free to Pursue and on Rockstar Finance. And my process to write a book review are as follows. Obviously, to read the book, or if I've already read it, to review my notes on the book, to review the quotes that I have taken from the book, to read anything that I've written about the book in the past, because it's obviously influenced me in some way. And frankly, if I'm not satisfied with everything I've reviewed so far, I will sometimes reread the book in its entirety. And so that's what happened with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That caused a reread. And the other one was Everything That Remains. I just ended up getting suckered in. And then a third one is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I ended up rereading the whole thing, even though I'd already read it once. And when I'm writing a review, I really think about a few specific key items. What I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who would benefit from reading that particular book, who the best target audiences might be, and also I want to consider other book recommendations. So I talk about similar books, or I talk about books that go deeper into certain themes of a given book. So I really try to be of service to the person consuming the book review, because what I'm really wanting to promote is not just the given book that I review, but reading in general. And as I've mentioned in my book reviews, I don't tend to review anything that is under 3 out of 5 stars, in my opinion. And finally, in this bonus, when I'm writing a book review, I also am very cognizant of the need to decouple a good book or a bad book from being from a good author or a bad author. And let me give you an example. There's a book called You Are a Bad... Yeah. I'll put the book right here. And I did not like that book by Jen Sincero. I really, really did not like that book. But I was getting this other book that she wrote, You Are a Bad at Making Money, I think is the title. I'll also put it here up here as an image for you. And I cringed when I thought, oh, I don't want to read this book because I read her other one, I didn't like it. And I just decided, no, a book stands on its own. Just because I didn't like something somebody wrote doesn't mean I won't like their next book. And I picked it up, and I thought it was relatively good. I didn't mind it, and I was okay. I was glad that I had overcome my objections and just read it. But that just goes to show you a book is a standalone entity, and that just like readers evolve, so do authors. And we should evaluate a book on its own merits and not necessarily based on the author or the author's background. As an example, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich has been discounted because he was deemed, or is still deemed, a charlatan by a lot of people. Well, I say let the book stand on its own. Does it have solid, proven advice? Yes, it does. Does it have some sections I don't agree with? Sure, as is the case with most books I read. But anyway, it's just this idea of decoupling a book from its author, I think it is helpful. Just because an author doesn't necessarily lead the life that we would approve of or behave in the way that we would approve of, or that we didn't like their previous work, doesn't mean they haven't evolved as a person, and doesn't mean they can't turn out quality work. And I mentioned it before, but I'll just mention it again. When I'm writing a book review, I really don't look at other book reviews. I don't want anybody to unduly influence my views about a book. And I think that sometimes once book reviewers see the reviews of other people, it can't help but influence their account of the book. And I think that sometimes we end up having the same story from a bunch of different book reviewers, and I wonder very much how the review of one critiquer is influencing another's. So I really try to stay clear of hearing anything about a book before I read it, as much as is possible. Sometimes with the classics, it's kind of impossible, but at the same time, a classic usually survives beyond the hype. That's why it's a classic. There you have it. That is my book reading process. Overall, from recording and statistics to exactly how I go about reading and reviewing books. I hope you enjoyed that kind of deep dive into the process, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts about my approach and this process down in the comments below. And if you liked the contents of this two-part series, or this video specifically, I would love it if you would consider giving it a thumbs up and or subscribing to this channel in general. I appreciate your time today. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. But for now, take care.